Welcome to the discussion of strategic leadership. Of all of the many topics I love in this course, I don't think I enjoy any more so than strategic leadership. And that's because I felt like there were times in the Air Force where I had positions where I was a strategic leader, and I just loved it. The What you gain by being a strategic leader is you gain the opportunity to influence a lot of things because you have decision-making authority. You can make things happen that other people just quite frankly can't. And it's a mix. There comes a lot of responsibility with it. And so it's not all sweetness and light. When you make bad decisions, people pay. But by the same token, when you get it right, it's tremendously rewarding. My hope for each of you is that if you ever desire a senior leadership position, that you have the opportunity to do that, to scratch that itch, to really express yourself. Trust me, if I could be in a position today where I was doing strategic leadership kind of things, I would do it in a flash. This is an excellent textbook chapter. I'm not going to try to reteach the textbook. I want you to read the textbook. What I'm going to try to do is give you a little bit more perspective to some of the lessons the textbook is going to offer. So these are the things I'm going to talk about today. When I was a kid, there was a famous TV show called What's My Line? They had a lot of celebrities on a panel. They would bring a person in, and the celebrities could ask yes or no questions that could be answered with a yes or no. And at the end, the panel had to guess what the job or the line, so to speak, of the secret guest was. And so I want to play What's My Line just a little bit with these questions. I'll be held responsible, or they're not questions, directly statements. I'll be held responsible for the organization's success or failure. In other words, if things go well, I'm going to get the credit. If things go badly, I'm going to get the blame. That said, the reality is I'll be relatively powerless to control the detailed daily action of the organization. And then, even though I have the most authority in the organization, when I exert that authority, I almost always engender resentment when I do so. Well, this is really no secret what my line is, given the topic of today. I'll use the term CEO throughout the discussion, but remember, and I'll talk about this more later, there can be lots of strategic leaders in an organization, not just the CEO. So, like it said, you'll be held responsible. I can tell you in the Air Force, when I was a group commander and I had several fighter squadrons that worked for me, I didn't go but about 2 or 3 people down in terms of accountability. And really, for most issues, I didn't go more than 1 person down, and that was the squadron commander. I was only really kind of willing to fire 3 people. I could fire a squadron commander, I could fire his chief of maintenance, or I could fire the chief of the pilots. Past that, wasn't going to go down in discipline because it was those 3 people that I held accountable, first and foremost, the squadron commander. And yet, in any larger organization, I'm not talking like a 2-person startup, but in a bigger organization, when you're at the top of the organization, you're going to find lots of things are happening that you can't control and you don't control because they're just down on the minutia. And that gets down to the final point. When you wade down into the weeds, so to speak, there are real problems with that. Now, the first job that I considered myself a strategic leader was when I was a fighter squadron commander. And in that, I had a guy that was incredibly talented who was running the flying side of the operation, running the pilots, the missions that were flown, those sorts of things. I had another incredibly talented officer that was running the maintenance side, that was directing the repair and preparation of the airplanes. Both great guys, both incredibly talented and capable. And every time I got down into their business, they let it be known they didn't like me in their business. And so you kind of wonder, what's my job? And I'm going to talk about that in a couple of slides. And I lived that last bullet in spades. When you get in and start making detailed decisions, people just kind of go, okay, if you want to make all the decisions, you will. You'll see that this will engender a lot of paralysis in organizations. When you are somebody who likes to weed down and make very small technical details, you'll find you're making all the decisions. Steve Jobs was famous for this in the product design. And it just so happened in product design, he really did want to make all of the big decisions. But there were a lot of things in Apple where Steve Jobs didn't make all the decisions. The current CEO, Tim Cook, kind of came up on the operations or logistics side. He was in charge of getting the products built, is where he cut his teeth. And that's not something that Steve Jobs exerted a lot of influence over. So you have to be careful about where you put your focus for decision-making authority. And you see this in some small businesses when the owner or the CEO wants to make every decision, the rest of the organization just is disempowered, and nothing happens unless the CEO makes it happen. And I'll talk more about this later. So I've already tipped my hand on this one. I don't believe that you have to be the CEO of an organization to be a strategic leader. To me, the key elements are you have to have latitude in setting the vision for the organization. In other words, you're not just executing somebody else's plan. You can see where that organization needs to go, and you can develop a plan to take it there. You have to have some authority over the resource allocation decisions. So again, you can put your resources where they need to go, and you need to have some control, especially over the people. If you don't have any control over the people, you're really fairly hamstrung. When I say control over the people, that can be hiring and firing. It can be rewards. But if you're doing those three things, then I would argue that you're a strategic leader. So if, for example, you are the general manager of a fast food restaurant, I would say you're a strategic leader because you've got some latitude in those three areas. Not much latitude in certain areas, but nonetheless, you're still a strategic leader. So I want to close this introduction with this concept of how important do you think a CEO is anyway? And so the statement is, to what extent do you think the success or failure of the company is directly attributable to the CEO? If you give a percentage of 0, you would say that means, really the CEO isn't more important than anybody else. And if you gave 100%, you would say they're it. If they succeed, it's because of them. I want you to think for a second where you'd come down on this scale. Where I would come down is in the 60 to 75% range. You'll hear some people that think that leadership is vastly overrated. I am absolutely not of that school. I think that leadership in an organization is incredibly important, and I have a lot of life experience behind that decision or that conclusion. But I don't put it up at 100% either. Why not? Well, there's external factors. Sometimes things are happening outside the organization that you can't control, and there's nothing you can do about it. And there are also people inside the organization that are incredibly important. Now, ultimately, who's responsible for that person being in that incredibly important job? You are, the CEO. And that's why I have a hard time going below 60, and that might even be lower than I would think, simply because the CEO should have the latitude to put the right people in the right jobs. Speaking of latitude, join me in the next video where I'm going to talk about how I come up with that number.